Hello, and welcome to Performance Check. My name is Rob, and today is kind of like a bit of a last minute thing, to be honest. I was going to be doing a stream with Lloyd, but he has limited time and is in a game this evening. So instead, I thought I would put this time to constructive use, constructive in terms of using the time to be creative. And I decided I would have a bash at trying to make some cultures for the Nine Kingdoms, which is my setting. It's the land in which the Lawkeepers takes place, with a number of other one shots that I've done, and it's a world that I'm so far very proud of. But more and more, I find myself looking into the cultures, specifically from the Adventures in Middle Earth works from Cubicle 7, which is a wonderful book. And it really helps facilitate play in Middle Earth that feels like genuine Middle Earth sort of vibes, I suppose is the best way to put it. It gives that tone. Now, why would I consider doing this? Well, the thing that I like about the culture function in Adventures in Middle Earth is that it immediately dictates to the players the do's and don'ts of your world without people ever having to have spoken to the GM. They can look at this and they can see exactly the kinds of characters that will be available for play. And not only that, what they're like and where they come from and how they operate. And I thought it'd be really handy. By the way, I'm not going to be copying this, but I do actually have the Adventures in Middle Earth supplement open. And I won't screen share it just in case copyright or whatever, but I'm just going to read first of all. This is the thing that it says in the contents. It says cultures. Chapter 3 covers the playable races that feature in Adventures in Middle Earth. Each has its own particular strengths and weaknesses, offering a broad range of play options, firmly rooted in Middle Earth and facilitating Middle Earth play. There you go. That's exactly what I've just said. But it just reinforces the fact that throughout all of these options, whatever you choose, and no matter, what you pick, you will be offered a broad range of options that each will be firmly rooted in Middle Earth. So it doesn't matter what you choose, it's still going to feel like Middle Earth, which I really like. Now, it's a tricky one because my world, the Nine Kingdoms, is predominantly a human setting. There are elves, there are dwarves, there are half-orcs, there are gnomes and halflings, bastardizations, as I call them. But they're not dominant in any way. They're not like a dominant sort of force in comparison to the rest of the world. So what I'm having to do is that because I understand that in my setting, people are going to play drow and moon elves and dwarves and half orcs and things like that, which is fine, and I'm open to that because I very much believe in the fact that if they want to be different and slightly out of the ordinary, then I'm more than happy to let that happen. Because if they are that, there comes consequences and there comes things that will affect them in the world. And that's what I'm hoping to introduce with the cultures. So I'll have my human cultures, and each one of them is going to have a different culture depending on what kingdom they come from. 9 kingdoms, 9 cultures for humans, okay? And then when it comes to the dwarves and the half-elves, well, I suppose there are half-elves, yeah, but moon elves and drow and things like that, they're also going to have them, but I think they're going to take on a slightly different feel because they're going to have a number of social implications coming into the game. They're going to know from the get-go, if I'm a drow and I'm walking into a human city, I'm going to turn heads. It's going to be a problem. But first of all, I put into the chat before I started a wee question, which is to begin with, to those of you watching, is a culture mechanic useful to you and why? So would any of you watching, because I've got 3 people there, uh, any of you watching consider a culture mechanic to be useful when developing either a setting, or would you find it useful as a player who's supposed to be creating a character for a setting that, say, you've otherwise never played in or are unfamiliar with? So that's how I'm going to break it down, or at least I'm going to give it a go. I'm not necessarily saying that this is going to be something that goes into something that I fully commit to producing, but I wanted to start um, roughly working out how the cultures would look. So I'm going to bring up my Google document. Let me see. So for those of you watching, this is going to be a lot of me sort of just riffing on ideas and maybe typing a bit and just talking things over. So if you find that boring, I completely understand. This might not be the video for you, but if you want to hang around and see me make some stuff, then by all means, please stick around. I'd love to have you here. So this is what I've got so far, and these aren't final names for the cultures, but these are what I'm going with. So I'm going to start with the cultures of the 9. I haven't got 9 yet. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the 9 human ones sort of named, and I've got a rough idea of what they will be. And then races of the 9, which make elves, which is drow, moon elves, high elves, dwarves of the obsidian arc, and that's just it for the moment with dwarves. I haven't thought of another dwarf culture yet. Half-orcs, bred and savage, and bastardizations, gnomes and halflings. The option is there, guys, if you want to pay a gnome and a halfling, but you're not going to like it. To be honest, when it comes to gnomes and halflings, I just feel like I probably should include them because enough people would want to play them, and I've already limited tieflings significantly, and I have eradicated dragonborn. So, you know, I'm narrowing the options. I suppose half elf is there as well. I should probably add that to the list of elves. I'll consider them part of the elven class. It's not first edition, Rob. Okay. I don't know. Should I screen share this? I don't know how to screen share. Let me work that out quickly. So, oh, I see. I do have some people in the chat. So, Charlotte and Chains, that's Sam, I believe, says, I suppose it depends on how the mechanics work. Like, is it roll tables? Does it give you bonuses or penalties based on your interaction with other cultures, etc.? No, I'm going to be basing this, and Sam, I know that you've just got them, so you'll be able to see, like, in fact, I have the book here. Let's go and have a look at the Adventures in Middle-earth stuff. And if you have a copy of Adventures in Middle-earth, then feel free to go along with me. So I'm going to go to page 36, which is the Dunedain. And for reasons I'm sure you're aware of, I won't screen share, even though I don't know how to. The Dunedain I'm familiar with because I play one in Lloyd's campaign. So essentially, what the culture of the Dunedain gives you is examples of names and a description of what they're like. So essentially, Dunedain, last descendants in the north of kings, basically kings among men that once came to Middle Earth over the sea. And it gives you a bunch of Dunedain names. So Arador, Aragorn, Burgil, Ecthelion, Turgon. What I find a little bit upsetting is how there's like a whole paragraph of male names, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 female names. But hey, this is Tolkien. Ridiculous. The other thing that comes with the cultures is a thing called standard of living, which is essentially what kind of quality of lifestyle is this culture used to? Are they nomadic? Do they live in cities with, walls and, you know, like trade, or are they farmers? Like do they have sewers? Are they a martial um, people? Can they, have they got iron? That kind of thing. So if you look at standard living for the Dunedain, it says that they basically have a medium one, I believe, which means that they have martial abilities and things like that. So that's quite interesting, because then if you think to Lord of the Rings and you're like, oh yeah, so Rohan would be kind of lower down because they have wooden houses and don't really have as much, they're not as grand as, say, Gondor, for example. So that's what that's for. And then you get a certain increase to the Dunedain's traits as well. Ability score increase, wisdom and constitution scores increase by 1, and they increase 2 additional ability scores by 1. So it gives you a little bit of boost to the character. And that's because that's interesting, because you get ability score increases as the player character as well as the that is interesting. And then it gives you size and speed and things like that, and certain skills that you would know from your culture, and that's about it. And it just gives you like a rough idea of the kind of role-playing style that you'll be going for if you're one of these characters, which I think is pretty neat. DBJ is here, and he says, sure, races are half culture anyway. Elves with longsword skill is a cultural skill, not genetic. Absolutely, it's a good way to think about it. Will Finazzo says, I guess character development would be helped by a culture generator. Yeah, I kind of like the idea of just presenting the cultures rather than having them be generated. I don't know. DBJ says 5e backgrounds are perfect, just reskin. Maybe. I do like them, but I like that there's, I could be wrong, I mean, a little more detail in this, I think. Will Finazzi says a cool idea is that tieflings could be from another race, like an orcish tiefling. It is a good idea. I have my own concept of what the tieflings are in my world, and it's not something I'm going to go into right now, because it's fun but also terrifying, and I'm going to save it for another day. Dominic Woods says, I think it would give me something to love hate in my culture, so maybe another level to add to a background. Interesting. Okay, guys. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my document, and I'm going to, first of all, go through the ones I do have of the humans, because I have quite a good idea of the breakdown of the cultures between the elves and dwarves and half-orcs and bastardization. So first of all, if you're from the frontier, and you can go onto the AbTab group, and you can see, if you search for 9 Kingdoms, you'll be able to find the map of the 9 Kingdoms. It's just a very, very rough map that I made, because I'm not very good at using Photoshop or GIMP or anything, so it's just rudimentary, but it'll give you an idea where these people are from. The Warbred, first of all, that's their name, and they're from the frontier. And they're called Warbred because they have basically, generations have lived and died throughout, and wars have been going on the entire time. They are on the very frontier of the civilized world, hence the name The Frontier. And they're like a hardy folk. And they're kind of on the edges of civilization. And the further north you go, the more civilization seems to ebb away. So these people would be sort of a low standard of living, I'd say, and low sort of technological level. But I think if they were going to be good at something, they'd have, I'm going to make a note of this, survivalist skills. Things to do with nature. And what else? Maybe knowledge, history, warfare, or something. Warfare. There you go. It's already got some skills in there. The next one is the Free People of Farwide. Now, these names aren't in no way final because, um, I don't know, names are something that I like to take my time over. Some of them I think are definitely going to say, some of them are definitely going to change. For example, Free People of Farwide is probably going to change. Farwide is a land that is surrounded by mountains and ravines. It is impenetrable from one point alone, the Cloud March, which is this huge bridge that leads into it. Um, and because of its isolation, I like to think that the people themselves are very proud, very stoic, very stubborn, because they have been removed from the rest of the world and aren't used to communicating with people who exist outside of their mountainous walls. So I don't know, maybe something to do with making things up, but I'm just like making notes to be honest. Constitution. You're going to do a constitution because they're hardy and things like that. Dear, what else could they be? Well, Farwide is the only free kingdom, so that could have something to do with it. Like potentially would have had a better chance of learning things to do with magic, so maybe Arcana. Magic is heavily policed in the rest of the Nine Kingdoms, in Farwide. Arcana it isn't a very heavily magical orientated world, so I think I might leave magic to the other races and have humans be, left. That's a thought though. One more thing. Let's see. I'm just going to look in the chat for a bit because I'm aware that you're all watching me just sort of think about stuff, which might not be too entertaining. Asterix. I'm thinking of the gore. Asterisk says, in my game, I have a culture that have their own currency that is super rare and valuable, but only to them. It's a good idea. That's a good idea. That's what I like about The Witcher 3, actually, is that when you fight different people, they have different kinds of currency, like florins or whatever. Yeah, it's a good idea, man. I haven't quite got to currency. I'm happy leaving it with gold and silver and copper for the time being. DBJ says reskin races as culture, although most are human, the stat mods and extras would be culturally specific. Just rename things in your setting. It's a good idea, man. I'm not disputing the reskinning the actual basic 5e stuff, and it hasn't, it is still on the cards. But I like the idea of that extra level of customization when it comes to the choosing who you're going to be in the Nine Kingdoms. And also, I mean, I don't know. Let me think. If there's going to be 9 human options, which is going to be a bit, it's going to throw people for a loop in a way. I don't know whether that's a good idea having, because I'll come back to that. But it's a good idea. It's a good idea, DBJ, and it isn't something that I'm ruling out completely just yet. I'm just throwing ideas around at this point. Carol says, hey, Carol. Carol says, I really like culture mechanics as used in Adventures in Middle-earth to define a sub-race, including the whole culture, how they live, etc. It gives you a lot of lore and feeling of your character when you make one. Absolutely. It's what I was saying at the top of the stream, Carol, is that it's sort of almost directing you into playing a compatible character, a character that's compatible with the world that you're entering, which I really like the sound of. Let me see. So the Wardlanders. So they're from the Wardlands. And the Wardlands basically are bordered by the most amount of kingdoms than any other kingdom in the Nine Kingdoms. And because of that, their culture has developed to be incredibly good at defense because they've had to be able to fight wars on multiple fronts and address the rest of the Nine Kingdoms in basically 360 because they're surrounded. So I really like the idea of them having some thing to do with defense. Like if they use a shield, because they idolize the shield, so maybe like a particular bonus when using a shield or something. Shield bonus, so maybe AC. I don't know if it's a bit OP to give them like a straight AC bonus, as a culture. I think that might be too much, but I'm putting it in there anyway, just a current thing right now. Shield bonus AC, and I think also they should be pretty good at diplomacy, because I think the thing is about the Wardlands is they would have had to have been good at diplomacy to make sure they were managing whatever wars they were fighting on in the right way. So, diplomacy. And in my mind, I have the idea of what these cultures are going to be like. In my head, it's just very difficult. The Wardlands is the former capital of the Nine Kingdoms as well. Before it was the Nine Kingdoms, it was all just one realm. And the Wardlands was the heart of the country where Greyheart is. Greyheart was the capital city. And it is now this colossal ruin. But people still live in this ruined city, and there's still a thriving sort of culture there, but it exists within the ruins of like a time long past, which I like. This is a really nice image that I could think of. Yeah, so that's them. So the next one is the Skotadi of Shadow Mesa. Now, Shadow Mesa is not a particularly nice place. It is the largest of the Nine Kingdoms. It is a reaching, terrifying land full of horrors and strange phenomena, magical and other things as well. And the Skotadi, I kind of imagine, is sort of backwater. Let me see, almost hillbilly, like, but not obviously not the accent, but like removed from the rest of society, sort of very insular people that don't communicate an awful lot, which is starting to sound a bit like Far Wide, to be fair, but Far Wide's, I'd say, a bit more technologically up there. So if we're going back to standards of living, Far Wide would be a medium. Shadow Mesa, the Skotadi, would be a low. It would be low standard of living, because they're in these strange villages that are just sort of in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of bogs and mires and steppes and things like that. And then mountainous places as well to the very, very west and south of the mesa. So low standard of living. I like to think that these people are quite scary, quite tribal, they're quite fearsome. So maybe something to intimidate. Maybe also something to do with survival. And let me see what else. That's all right. I've got three. There's three. I'm trying to think of three for each. This is a good one. I quite like this one. We're moving to Evermore, and Evermore, the culture there is the human culture there are known as the Sylph, and the Sylph are essentially nicknamed Fey Touched. They've the culture, the human culture there would have existed for a long time, interacting a lot with the Moon Elves, who were the force supreme in the area before everything went to shit. And because of that, I like to think that they're almost kind of like the embodiment of. I think quite a lot of half elves would exist there, for example. I think sort of like a Fey ancestry would be there. So Fey meets humans essentially. So, like, imagine humans that act like elves, aren't elves, but have sort of like had the elven culture bleed into their own. So there's humans, but they have that elven sort of heritage there, which I think is quite interesting. Because as the elves are sort of on the way out of this world, and the humans are becoming more and more prominent, like I think they are. I don't know. I like the idea of them. And to be honest, like I think I'll steal some of the stuff from the elves and give it to the Sylph, the Fey Touched. So that's easy enough to do. So maybe some elf traits. Question mark. Copperfolk from the Penny Kingdoms. That's a working title. I don't know if they're actually going to be called Copperfolk, but the Penny Kingdoms, three provinces, actually technically provinces, divided into three by ruling counts. The funny thing about the Penny Kingdoms is that you can go to bed on one count's land one night, and then you wake up the next morning and the land is owned by someone completely different, because bidding wars are the way that wars are fought in the Penny Kingdoms. It is just by money and crops and how many soldiers you have. It's just the most corrupt, horrendous place to live in the world, because land will be brought up beneath you and you won't even know about it. There are armed tax collectors that walk around that have a very sinister kind of purpose that I'm not going to go into just yet. And it is also the primary domain of the bastardizations, the gnomes and halflings. And yeah, so I think, I don't know, lots of roguish elements come from the Penny Kingdoms, I think. I know that's sort of very generalized, but let me think. I've got roguish elements for now. Remember, guys, this is just me throwing ideas around, and if you do have any thoughts of your own, by all means, let me know. Probably not going to try. I'm not going to copy them though, because I'm very aware I don't want people to be watching this and them suggest an idea, and then I just use it, and then because then that isn't me thinking of it; it's getting other people to do my work for me, which is not very nice. So those are the 6 that I have. I still have to work on Septua, which is the island kingdom. It's also home to the observants, which are one of the 4 pillars. For those of you familiar with my setting, you'll know the 4 pillars are the magisterium that govern magic. There's the court of whispers that are basically the guardians of secrets and espionage and assassins. There is the tribunal, which is law enforcement and trials and judgment. And then there's the observance, which is about upholding the religion that is basically for the God King, who is the ruler of the 9 kingdoms. So Septia is home to the observance. Lots of things to do about religion. And the thing I quite like about the God King is that he hasn't entirely demolished all elements of different faiths, because I think it's a smart thing for when someone takes over a land to allow the people to cling on to certain elements of. It's like Christianity coming over into the UK, still heavily influenced by paganism, and still is to this day. If you look at Christmas and things like that, and other festivals, so elements of a time before show through the religion of the observance, which allows there to be basically, it's the reason it's like that is for players to have their own sense of what, if they're a paladin or a cleric, for instance, they can be a bit more specific on where their power comes from, given to them by the God King, if they follow that particular way, legal religion. But it can come from an element of nature or an element of society, like justice or whatever. You know what I mean? So Septia is home to that. So lots of religious elements. Also seafaring, because they're an island race and they bear the most powerful navy of the 9 kingdoms. So it's to do with seafaring, and also trade, because they are the richest as well. They're pretty damn good, old Septia. Yeah. And there's Sovereign, which I haven't gone into yet, because I think Sovereign is basically going to be a melting pot of all sorts of different cultures. So maybe actually Sovereign won't have one. Maybe. Because it's like a huge, like almost half of it is a city. So it's just a colossal city. and a lot of it is in disrepair and ruin and uninhabitable. But as you get closer and closer to the center, like it becomes this metropolis of tyrannical proportions. Basically, it is the stronghold of the God King. So maybe there could be like city folk, for example. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to go back to the chat. I hope this isn't boring people into insanity. I've got 4 viewers. Bless you guys. If you want me to talk about something else whilst I'm here as well, do let me know, because I can imagine that this might be a bit difficult. Will says intimidate and maybe something against fear effects for the Shadow Mesa guys. That's a good idea for fear effects. Yeah, man. And that makes an awful lot of sense because there's a lot of scary things in Shadow Mesa, so it would take a lot to. Fear effects resistance. It's a melting pot of ideas right now. Carol says, I never have any thoughts of my own. That's really sad. And then Will says, like, some people think the God King is the sun. Maybe. Oh, you mean like how they interpret him? Potentially, yeah. Like, it's hard to describe, and I'm not going to go too much into the God King today. There will be a day where I do, but it is not this day. Carol says, but I do really like using cultures. It's good, isn't it? Voice of Man says, I'm on a Cthulhu tip right now, aren't we all? We're all on an eternal Cthulhu tip. And Carol says that was a joke. Okay, well, at least by doing this, I now have a rough idea what all of the cultures are going to be. I'm not going to actually make them on the stream because, my God, I'll be here for hours. But that's been helpful. And what I've done is I've just, for those of you watching, if you're still here, bless you for watching me do that. I've just thought about sort of the personality of each of the kingdoms that, I mean, admittedly, I have in my head more than anything, but like, it's the kind of feel that I want to get. And I've just made those notes so I can now go back to the core books, for example, and look, well, what fits best from all of the existing races and cultures. And like DBJ was saying, do a bit of reskinning, which I'm thinking will probably be the best way to go about it. And I am, to be honest, with them as well, because I want this to be something that is my own. I am thinking of developing a few little things that are brand new just for the Nine Kingdoms, because, you know, if it's just reskin D&D, then why bother looking at this supplement? Just make your own one, you know? Like, I'm gonna make sure that there's like something special about all of them that's new and in no other setting. And I have a few pretty cool ideas, but this is not the time for that. So I'm going to quickly go through the races of the Nine Kingdoms, the ones that aren't humans, essentially. So elves, like I said, drow, moon elves, high elves, and I guess half elves as well. So the drow are split in two. Dark drow, light cast drow. And for those of you who don't know, the light cast drow were the drow that were left upon the surface as the endless night was dispelled. And many of the drow were abandoned on the surface, and many of them were exiled to the surface. So the two cultures of drow. The Underdark drow are basically, I wanted to make them different from any other kind of drow that I've ever seen, so I decided rather than the oldest tale of ever, you know, the elves banishing the drow into the Underdark, I decided instead to give it a little bit of a twist, and the drow actually chose to go into the Underdark. The drow are the bravest motherfuckers in the Nine Kingdoms because they chose to go and live in the Underdark and repel all of the abyssal, terrifying, unknown threats that the dark places of the world have to offer. So the Drow aren't the cackling, evil race that they are in Forgotten Realms. They're actually like quite a noble, if slightly sadistic still, masochist rather, I should say, because they're doing it to themselves. But they're yeah, they're pretty badass. I like the Underdark Drow, and then like Cast Drow, sort of abandoned versions of those. So those are the two cultures for the Drow. I love Drow anyway, so I had to make them cool for my setting. Moon Elves, which I can't really go into too much because of stuff that's coming up in my campaign, and I don't want to spoil it in case my players watch this. The Moon Elves are pretty damn rad, and they've got their own pretty cool thing, which I will be typing here. They also have their two separate cultures. Then High Elves. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. The only reason why High Elves are included is because Locris, who plays Azarax in The Lawkeepers, kept referring to the High Elves in my games to the point where I was like, he said it so much now that there has to be High Elves in my setting. So, and so here we go. These are the High Elves, and essentially, I like to think that the High Elves are basically turncoats. They turn against their own people in support of the God King. Which is terrifying because he now has elves, incredibly old, powerful elves on his side. But the mystery is that no one knows where they are. No one knows where they are. It's really strange. But that's the High Elves. And then the Half Elves speaks for itself. It can be anything. Any of those. So it can be a half Drow, half Moon Elf, half High Elf. The Dwarves of the Obsidian Arc. I love the Obsidian Arc as a concept. Carol says, look into the Adventures in Middle-earth cultures too, though I'm sure you are familiar with them. Make your own version for what you want. Yeah, Carol, at the beginning of the stream, I've got it open at the moment. I actually went through the Dunedain to give an example of what a culture could be like. Asterisk says, can you tell us about the God King? No. I could, but I'm not going to. Because it's kind of a big mystery. It's a big mystery in my campaign. And if I would talk about it here, then it could ruin it. So no one knows anything really about the God King. The only thing they do know is that he has another name, which is the Seneschal. And that's the only clue anyone has ever had. So if you want, go and look up the word Seneschal. But that's all I'll give you. I really like doing this though, guys. And I'm sorry if people are watching find this dull, because I am literally just rambling on and typing. I can imagine that can't be the most entertaining thing in the world. But the interesting thing is that it is quite motivating having you guys there because it's forcing me to do it. You know what I mean? Not that I need to be forced to do stuff in my D&D world, but it keeps me on track. At this point, I would have walked off over there for a bit or stood in that corner. I'm just making things up now, but you get what I mean. No procrastination. So let me tell you about the dwarves, because I really like the dwarves, and they've gone through many changes. And I don't know if they're ever going to show up in Lawkeepers because they keep deliberately not going to see them. There is a mountain range to the east of Farwide, as it's surrounded by mountains. The mountains sort of look like waves. There's this weird wavy shape to the mountain range. So naturally, it's called the Stone Sea. And legend has it that the dwarves were once able to use the power of lithomancy, the ability to move and manipulate stone with magic and pass through it. And the Obsidian Arc was this colossal obsidian ship that would move through mountains, a warship. And it was basically like a moving warship that was also a war factory. A secret of the dwarves passed down greedily and guardedly throughout their generations of basically this war machine that can basically make weapons and armor to the highest quality at a ridiculous speed. So the dwarves are dangerous, like super dangerous, which I really like the idea of. Usually with the dwarves in most fantasy settings, like they're sort of on their last legs and they're kind of like dying out or whatever. And while the dwarves aren't as numerous as other races in the Nine Kingdoms, they are easily one of the most dangerous because they can make so many weapons so quickly, and they are basically now. Let me finish the story first. So they're in the Obsidian Ark, and it can move through stone, and it's terrifying, right? And they can appear wherever they want and just mop people up with this friggin' ship, this that comes out of the ground, basically. And then all of a sudden, one day, it stops working. The dwarves are in the Stone Sea. They are at the place where they, for some reason, they always have to go back to the Stone Sea with this thing. So they consider that to be where they weigh anchor, as it were, but the stone anchor. Weird to think about. But it stops working. The Obsidian Ark moves no more. So what happened was the dwarves, over the many centuries, built out. So now the heart of their city is still known as the Obsidian Ark. So their city is now built out from this giant warship that used to be there moving home, but now it's just in this one place. So they've had to build around it and build a new home. But their war engines, their forges still work. So while they're not able to move, they can still generate a ridiculous amount of merchandise, because the dwarves in my setting are now arms dealers. I am an arms dealer. Yeah, so they're arms dealers, essentially. And basically, get given money and whatever to make weapons for people, and they don't even have to really. It's what they would be doing anyway, so they're just like a really successful race, and they help the God King. Essentially, they are on good terms because they are like the figureheads of industry in the world because of their ability to make things and make things well and make things quickly. You'd be so surprised how many wars have been won and lost because people weren't able to make enough weapons or armor in time. So yeah, that's the Dwarves of the Obsidian Ark. So that's basically what their culture is all going to be around: craftsmanship and warfare. Like, but really, I don't know. I think I have to expand the dwarves. So there has to be more than one culture of dwarves, maybe. I don't know, but I like those, and they're the only dwarves I have so far. Well, it says like spitballing ideas. Ever thought of making like half dwarven, half elven characters? Yeah, so I've said, well, there are elves and dwarves. Elves, I've said, well, unless I can say, well, elves couldn't breed with humans. Maybe no, because the sylph have technically bred with no. So yeah, there are half elves, half dwarves. I don't know. I think with half elves, I think it makes sense because I like the idea that dwarves stick to their own. You know what I mean? Elves are a bit more forgiving and a bit more loving, I think, than the dwarves. And I think symbolically, it's nicer that the dwarves sort of just stick to their own and don't do that. Maybe there are like the odd half dwarf, but I'm not going to make a culture of half dwarves. No. Be interesting though. How cultures view different half breeds, I enjoy seeing. Absolutely. So that's the dwarves anyway. Let's move on to half orcs because these I love. So I did a stream about this like a little while ago. I think it was on Facebook. I don't know if I did it on YouTube, but the idea of half orcs, let's face it, it's a little bit icky. For years and years and years, we've always had to ask the question, well, how was the half orc conceived? And when you think that one of those involved is a vicious, in the D&D books, I will point out, not in all settings, but in D&D, orcs are fucking savage, monstrous creatures. Okay, so for that to procreate with a human, it's just a horrible thing to think about. And I'm like, do we still have to put up with that? Can there not be another way? So naturally, I made it worse, but in a different way. So because of the raw fighting strength of the orcs, that would be a thing that did not go unnoticed by the powers that be in my world. So to better enforce the rule of the Nine Kingdoms, a motion was set about that a breeding program was going to be created where humans and orcs were basically interbred like a farm, producing half orcs. So they would have the ferocity and the strength of an orc, but the docile and adaptable mind of a human being, thus making the perfect soldiers and the perfect slaves. That's what half orcs are in the Nine Kingdoms. And they're terrifying. Playable as well. They will be a playable race. And so you can be of two castes. You can be a war caste half orc, a slave caste, or a savage, where you are still sort of the from perhaps escaped slaves or rebellious soldier caste, where you were born on the run, basically. Because there are some half orc kind of splinter groups, small groups of things that people could come from if they wanted to. But in general, the half orcs make up like a decent amount of the fighting force of the Nine Kingdoms that are just terrifying. Like brutally efficient. Think Uruk-hai, but like a little less like animal. Like they have a bit more. They have a bit more up there than the Uruk-hai. Even though the Uruk-hai are super smart, they maybe a bit more like, I don't know. Maybe they are just like Uruk-hai, I guess, because they are technically goblin men, aren't they? The Uruk-hai. So how cultures view different half breeds. Oh, I've read that. Asterisk says, have you ever thought about giving goblins or a similar monster a culture? So there's only been one goblin that's been a playable character in any of the games I've run for the Nine Kingdoms. My mate Dennis, who plays in Against the Shadow with me over on Lloyd's channel, he played a goblin in a one-shot where there is technically a goblin marshal. The marshals, if you watch Lawkeepers, will knows what Ezekiel Aurelian was like. Wandering lawman that used to be sort of like the enforcement of the world or the continent before the Nine Kingdoms. And it's kind of like a tradition, almost more like a vocation, where people, like, you'd be a lone soldier, not a soldier, a lone warrior that would walk about and keep the peace. And that's what one of these goblins were. But that was the martial sort of bond than an actual culture. I haven't given it too much thought, to be honest, because I've not actually had goblins or orcs actually appear in Lore Keepers yet. I imagine a lot of them exist up in the Sublime, which is the very north of the Nine Kingdoms, which isn't technically a kingdom, it's just a wasteland. But there'd be like barbaric societies and tribes and things, but I'd have to think of something a little more, yeah, something a bit more interesting than that, I think, because that's what they usually are anyways, isn't it? Tribes of orcs and goblins, like. But then again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I don't think I would change it too much, just for the sake of it. Well, it says half orc super soldiers armed by dwarven ingenuity. That's how you make a badass army. Yeah, exactly. Like you have the half orcs and they're armored by the dwarves. It's not going to go well for people going up against that, is it? Oh, did my camera go off for a second? That was really weird. So yeah, those are my cultures, and then there's the gnomes and the halflings, which I'm not going to go into. But this is just me pointing out that having the different cultures for the humans and then having the sub races each having a culture of their own as well, I think is quite interesting, and that gives a lot of diversity, I think. Maybe too much, I don't know. I don't think it is too much though. If it's replacing like the background, it's something I need to think of. Like, as I mentioned before, this is my first foray into this. This is the first work I've ever done on making the cultures of the Nine Kingdoms. Pardon me. Have a drink. Apologies. But like I say, this is my first sort of step into making the cultures or backgrounds, or whatever they're going to be. And you were present for those of you live. But I think I'm going to call it there. I think like I've had quite a few ideas about it, and I've got to do the hard work, which is go away and type it all up and expand on it. But I'm thankful that you guys were there because I don't know, maybe you find it useful to see like just talking through ideas is the best way of getting to the crux of what you need. And yeah, like I think I've got like a fairly strong idea about what those cultures should be. It's just giving them mechanical benefits that are viable and useful, and aren't crap. Because there's nothing worse than picking something like that and then realizing, oh, I'm never going to use this. So we shall see. So what I'll do is, for those of you here, as you guys have been super supportive and sat and watched, and whilst I've typed and stuff, I'm going to sit here for a bit. I'm going to have a bit of a puff. I'm going to have a sip of tea. If you want to know anything about the Nine Kingdoms, other than anything about the God King, then I don't know, screw it, you can ask stuff. Just ask whatever you want. You've been really cool and sat with me whilst I've done this. Just ask me stuff if you want to know anything before I go. Call it like a mini Q&A. I mean, hopefully this has been interesting in some shape or form. Maybe if you like the Nine Kingdoms, or if you were thinking about making your own cultures. I don't know. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I can tell you. But if you have any questions, put them in there. I'll tell you this one last thing before I go. And if I don't get any questions by the time I finish, then I'll end the stream. Because I understand that people are like, no, we're not really that interested. Which is totally valid. So the bastardizations. I'm kind of thinking that halflings are kind of mutants. And I don't know if that's a good idea or not. Like, I don't know, maybe not mutants, but like genetic throwbacks or something. Um, I like the idea of them just being not like not like happy hobbits, but more like, oh, hello, like really almost grotesque kind of creatures that are just a little bit underhanded and a bit horrible, you know. Basically, just like imagine a cross between. In fact, that's what it'd be. It'd be like a cross between a human being and a goblin. That's how I imagine, like either halflings or gnomes. No, gnomes. That's what gnomes would be. Gnomes would be like that. And I've got to write that down. Because I'd never thought about it like that in much detail until I actually spoke the words. So, um, so gnomes are a horrific cross between human and goblin like creatures. I even think maybe like a so they could be really charismatic and tricksy and but they're just nasty. Really underhanded. And I think if they're like that, they might be a bit more appealing than if they're just like, hello, I'm a gnome. I'm going to cast a wish on you. Blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like a little less fairy tale, more like grim fairy tale. Okay, Asterisk says, I know this is complicated, but what gods do you have in the Nine Kingdoms? So it's not that complicated. So there is the God King, which is it has a religion unto himself that essentially people pray to and are given power from if they submit to his will. And there's also the Forgotten, which are essentially the gods that came before. If you are watching Lawkeepers, you'll notice that Marius keeps praying now to people like the grandfather and what's another one? There's another one which was of the harvest, and I've forgotten the name of it. Because to be honest with you, I haven't done too much on the Pantheon yet, but essentially the Forgotten Ones are elemental-like figures that are more reminiscent of a paganist belief than Catholicism, if you get what I mean. But to avoid it becoming too much of the old gods, you know, like from Game of Thrones, like because I don't want to stray too close to that sort of thing. I am, shall we say, adapting certain things from existing D&D gods. For example, things like secrets and things like that, like Vecna and yeah, just sort of like taking a look at what it would be like if the old paganist sort of religious figures were entwined with the forces of the arcane and the telling, which is another power source in my world. So things like that. That's basically the two things. So there's the Forgotten Ones, and there's the Forgotten and the Order of the God King, the Observance, otherwise known as the Collective of Civilized Faith. And Will says, a friend of mine told me a good way to make a culture is to think of what's expected of their children or what it's like growing up in the culture. Yeah, it's a great way of thinking about it. Like, for instance, if you were born in Scania, which is something I forgot to speak about, which I will quickly add to the list. You're reminding me of things to add to my list, friends. Thank you very much. So Scania will be the last thing I talk about before I finish the stream. And Scania essentially is it's called Scania because the word comes from the term the stage. And it's called the stage because it was the main theatre of war in a seismic event known as the Reign of Chaos, which was where everything was going nuts and there was just warfare and bloodshed and hellfire. It was just the worst. And then the God King descends and unifies the land and divides it into 9 kingdoms. And Scania were the first ones to be like, yo, hey guy, we want to join you. And Scania is basically a society made up of old feudal houses, houses that existed before the God King arrived. And they are one of the few elements of the society that came beforehand that still exist in the world today. So, old feudal houses. So, children growing up, to your point, Will, children growing up in Scania would have a very rigid and nasty traditional upbringing. Scania sided with the God King early. Lots of trade, lots of benefits for being on the winning side of a war. Put it that way. Like coming out on top at the end of First World War with the Treaty of Versailles, for example. Which I think is interesting because land is divided between winners and losers now. Which I really like. I like the idea that, and because of that, they will all react differently to each other. This is something that Lloyd is integrating into his Iscloft world, is that there's an inbuilt relationship between different cultures. So someone from Gunland in Iscloft will hate someone from somewhere else, because they have an old rivalry. The Iron Eyes, I believe they're called. Because they're brought up to believe that. So it's a very good point, Will. And it reminded me to do Scania. So actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 kingdoms, 9 cultures. We did it, guys. So if there aren't any more questions, there are not. I'm gonna end the stream. So thank you ever so much for dropping by. I hope you didn't find this too dull. It was just me working on some stuff, but maybe it'll inspire you to think about those kind of things when it comes to building your world and the relationship between cultures and the world around them affecting what they're like. And I know I've only been very, very vague about the influences, and that's going to be subject to change, but I feel like I took a step in the right direction today. And it's kind of thanks to you guys. So thank you very much for watching. So if you like this video, give it a like. If you see more like it, then give me a subscribe, or not, from all friends here, or are we? Take it easy. I hope that all of your performances are up to standard.